We're back, and after a very brief comment by Steve Bryen, we're going to pick up on the thought that the Iranians are not going to behave as we hope they will. Steve, I'm sorry to have had to interrupt you, but pick up where you left off.
Well, the administration has pledged to make a deal with Iran. They're very anxious to make a deal. They want to lift the sanctions. They even want to lift the sanctions on the Revolutionary Guard. I mean, the terrorism designation, for example, take it off. I mean, they're absolutely hell bent on doing this, even though everyone tells them, I think correctly, that this deal is a bad deal. And no matter what it is, it's a bad deal because Iran's nuclear program is already pretty far advanced. And there's nothing in it, as far as we know, we haven't seen the details yet, but there's nothing really that's going to change it. They're going to stay with that program, the nuclear program. So,
and that's really the key point. The administration keeps saying that we have to do a deal because an Iran with nuclear weapons is just unacceptable. But the point is, no matter what they do, how much they grovel, how much they make concessions, if the Iranians aren't actually going to give up the bomb, all you're doing is further increasing their appetite to have it and to wield it, quite possibly against Israel and even us. And that leads to this question. So what do we do, Steve Bryen, about this Iranian threat that will have better results than the course that this administration is on?
Well, let's take the bombing yesterday of Erbil as an example. They sent 12 Fateh 110 missiles. They're pretty good sized missiles. They carry a 500 kilogram warheads fired at our consulate, which they claim was an Israeli Zionist operation. But they were really firing it at our consulate. Let's face it, that was the whole idea. And at least one or two of those rockets landed in the courtyard of the consulate. They didn't hit the consulate, according to what the news says. But this is IRGC. This is the Revolutionary Guards. And this is, they're just trying to stick it to us. You say, okay, you guys, you want to deal with us? We want maximum, permissions from you. We want sanctions out. We want you to stop confronting us. We want a free hand in the Middle East. We want to get rid of Israel. Those are their objectives. There's no secret about that.
Yeah, there's no secret about it. And it just makes all the more crazy making, really, what the administration is doing.
It's irresponsible.
Constantly I think appeasing.
It's appeasing, but it's worse than appeasing. It's conceding. It's conceding territory. I mean, it's basically saying, okay, Iran, you can dominate the Middle East. You can dominate Iraq. You can dominate Saudi. You can dominate UAE. I mean, it's absolutely conceded concessions. It's appeasement in the pure sense of this terrible country, terrible leadership of a country.
And one of the upshots of it, Steve Bryen, is it not, is that countries, and you mentioned several of them, notably the Saudis, are simply now making a separate peace, if not directly with Iran, with Iran's most important sponsor.
Oh, no, but they've been negotiating with Iran. Yeah, but they're two different things in a way. I mean, they have been negotiating with the Iranians, except that yesterday the Iranians called off the negotiations because the Iranians are feeling stronger and stronger. They don't have to give anything away.
Right.
If they have U.S. permission to do what they want, then that's what's going on here.
Yeah.
The Saudis also are dealing with the Chinese because they don't trust us.
That's the point.
Particularly for important weapons. So they bought and have bought for years large ballistic missiles from China.
Right.
But they may be buying other stuff, especially air defenses, especially aircraft. I mean, they just don't think we're reliable.
Right.
And we're not.
And they may be selling oil to the Chinese as well, I would reckon. So, Steve, when you look at this...
Oh, yeah, but that's always been true.
But it's, I suspect, going to be even more so, and maybe in renminbi denominated transactions rather than dollars, which will
be currency, right?
A very substantial change in the reserve status of the dollar if the petrodollar goes over the side. Um, Steve, let me pivot to another problem that we're also facing that the administration seems to me to be making a hash up of, and that is Ukraine. I'd be interested in your thoughts as to both the likelihood that the Russians will uh, finish the job more or less with impunity, crushing Ukraine, and that the message being sent to others around the world will be, again, more in the nature of make separate pieces. What is your sense of what's happening there at the moment? And as importantly, what should we be doing now, do you think?
Well, I mean, let's start at the beginning. I mean, both the United States, which has some culpability in this mess, and NATO, the NATO countries, signaled right at the start, even before the invasion, that we weren't going to do anything about it. So the Russians immediately knew they had a pretty much free hand. So that was a mistake. That
No,
was a
you're
huge
not going to
mistake
do anything about
because
it, meaning militarily engaging with them,
we
of course.
weren't going to answer it militarily. I mean, we were not going to take any action to stop the Russians from invading Iran, Ukraine, um, because we just didn't think we could do anything about it. I mean, that was apparently the logic. But I remember when the British said we wouldn't, and we said we wouldn't, and NATO said they wouldn't. The head of NATO. So I mean, this is a free pass to Putin. Now, the second part of your question was, what about the outcome? The Russians can stay there as long as they want, but they're going to continue to lose people, and their economy is going to continue to sink into the mud. I think the Russians are prepared to negotiate now,
You do.
haltingly, but I think Putin's coming around to that point of view.
And what are the terms likely to be?
Well, I think that as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, they're going to have to give up the Donbass area, which is Luhansk and Donetsk, which anyway was a foregone conclusion. They're going to have to admit in some form that Crimea belongs to Russia. They're going to have to agree no NATO. I think that's an absolute requirement. And probably they're going to have to make some changes in the size of their military and how they operate, where they locate, that sort of thing. A kind of not demilitarization exactly, but lowering the conflict threshold from a Ukrainian point of view in exchange for something from the Russian side, which would be to pull the troops back, far back, and not threaten Ukraine in the future. So I
Yeah.
think there's a basis for it. It's up to Putin now. I mean, Zelensky has signaled now that he's finally willing. Finally, I think what's happened here, to be completely honest, is that Zelensky has given up on Washington. He has reached a point where he realizes that he's not going to get enough help from Washington to stay in the war, and that he can't believe what Washington's telling him. And I think he's right to understand that. And I'm sure the Israelis told him that
Yeah.
because they know very well. And I think that therefore Zelensky's ready to negotiate. Putin, the Russians said this morning that they are starting to think about seriously winding this thing up with a negotiation.
Hmm.
But it's going to have to be at a very high level. And one of the critical issues here is Putin's health and whether he's capable of meeting with Zelensky and outside of Russia, or whether he's willing to take that risk.
Yeah. Steve Bryen will be watching this closely, as will you, I know. The
Yeah.
terms seem to be pretty draconian. The damage that's been done to Ukraine has been extensive and will likely become even worse in the days to come as these negotiations, if they do take place, progress. I hope that this will come to an end quickly and that there will be something left of Ukraine by the time it's all done. Steve Bryen, thank you for your
That's
insights
the issue.
on
Yeah, that's
this
the part. Right.
as on the other Iran and so much more. We'll look forward to consulting with you often in the days ahead here at Securing America. The Enemies Within with Dr. Scott Powell right after this.